Hello, podcasting world. I'm Peter Teuscher and here with Tobi and Peter. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. We cover personal development, professional development, and sometimes a little bit of philosophy. How you doing today, Tobi?
Good, thank you. I just realized you changed the intro a little bit to
Come on,
podcasting world. Yeah, that's
gotta
great.
change it up. It was spontaneous.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's what it's about, right?
yeah. Well, it's the world of people listening to podcasts, and we're hoping to tap into a few or share with a few people out there.
Yeah.
Hey, so last time we talked about appreciation.
Appreciation. Yeah.
So, did
Uh,
you have any afterthoughts?
yeah, I did. I have an afterthought. I made a mistake with my sort of post dialogue sort of actions. No, it wasn't a big, but I was thinking a lot about appreciation as we talked about. This is something that I should do much more. And a few days after that, I wanted to send an appreciation email to somebody who I've been working with. But when I sent it to this woman, but at the same time, I've just been working with a contract for another woman, so I had that woman's name in my mind. So I wrote to this woman, calling her for another name. It's like, oh, I really appreciate what you're doing, but I was calling her the wrong name. So that was a bit of embarrassment, but it turned out good. But of course, I have to explain myself. But it took.
Okay, she didn't feel that appreciated because you forgot her name or you got her name wrong.
That's it's a pretty basic thing to do when you show appreciation, that at least you use the correct
Yeah,
name.
yeah. Well, I actually, I think, reflecting, first of all, we had some appreciation on that episode. Some people enjoyed the topic.
Yeah.
So I'm glad people just didn't sort of write it off as kind of, a bit of um, fluff. But I actually, it made me really, well, it's always a good reminder to get back into a practice of, gratitude, appreciation. I think that it really helps your mindset and your overall mood. But I think it created it made me aware of a lot of contrast. I mean, we just are so fixated on what's wrong and what we're unhappy with, and I think making reminding myself to practice appreciation more made me realize how much I do. How much there are days when I'm like, looking at the negative when I have so much to be, to be grateful for, right?
Mm,
Um,
mm,
uh, so, I was under the weather, and I ended up having to miss out on some work, and it's funny because my girlfriend said to me, think about how many people have been affected by health issues the last 2.5 years, and
mm.
how they've what you're going through. You can appreciate that you still you've done so well. So yeah, it just there's the reminders are out there everywhere.
Mm.
And when you get yourself in catch yourself complaining, it's that's exactly the right time to kind of go back to going, okay, well, actually I have a lot to appreciate.
Mm. Yeah.
So anyway, and that was a good reminder. Look, none of us are perfect, and you and I can talk about all the ways that you can live better, work better, and doesn't mean we practice it all the time, right? It's
Yeah, no, and we're all humans. We all do mistakes. I think, the important thing is just to look back on it and learn from it, right?
exactly just can every day is a step forward, and there's always room for improvement, definitely in my case. So good. Well, I've picked a topic for us today that I find interesting, and I hope other people will too. Today I want to talk about identity, and you can talk about this from many different aspects, as I'm sure we will, because I'm sure you'll have a different take, a different perspective on it.
Mm.
But I think there's a lot of reasons to think about, and to to get a sense of what identity means to us, to others. I think there are a lot of things. People create identities for themselves that are limiting, right? They have these over time, as we get older, we get very set in our ways. I also think that as we get older, there's not enough people asking the question, "Who am I?" And reflecting on that on multiple levels, and I think in organizations as well. I mean, when coming from, I've coached basketball. I think you've coached soccer or football, as we call it in Europe. And I think in professional sports, I've heard it often said, that team lacks identity, right? And you notice it in organizations as well. What's your team or what's your organization's identity? And that has a lot to do with values and that sort of thing. So I think today I'd really like to talk about identity on a personal level and on a organizational level. And we talk a lot about diversity, and some people talk about the big headline things like gender or race and so on. And, certainly that can be part of identity, but I think identity goes so much deeper than that. And if when you're talking about identity, if you only, occupied yourself with race, gender, or your sexuality or whatever, I think those are the things that get the headlines, but I think it's so much deeper than that, right? I mean, when you look at what differentiates humans from our next primate cousins, it's less than 2% of the genetic material that makes us up. So imagine something like skin color or, whatever racial differences. Imagine how tiny and infinitesimally small that difference is between people. And if you want to make that the big difference in your identity, it just seems so superficial, right? Whereas, the deeper things we talk about, your values, different behaviors and mindsets and cultural, the cultural norms. I think there's just so much more to talk about when it comes to identity than the things that often get the headlines. And so, and that then contributes to, the kind of life that you live, the way you present yourself to others. A lot of your behavior, is just this feedback or reaffirming, the way you identify, and I think all of those things are important. So that's the direction I'd like to take our conversation, and see where that goes. What do you think?
Well, what's striking me when you're introducing the topic is I start thinking about, well, why is this important? Because of course we have our own identities. Why we identify different types of identities all the time, if you want to put it that way. And I must say I really agree with that part about when we're looking at the diversity of identities that we have. We have a tendency to be very shallow in how we define them in different categories, and that we could do, and I mean, such an amazing better job at looking at depth and width there, in terms of just different cognitive diversity in the way differences where we think or we dress or behave or perspectives we look at things, etc. But I was wondering, so in that sense of why is this important? That why do we limit ourselves to identities? What can we do to look beyond identities? Because before we also talked about roles, right? We had a subject about roles, and I start thinking about now, the roles or the identities that I take in different contexts, and how that can push my or steer or affect my identity in different situations. So today I've been a football coach. I've been a professional coach. I've been a board member. I've been a father. I've been a husband. I've been a house owner, and that makes you do different things, and you at least for me, it makes me take. I like to see it like wearing different hats. So if I put that hat on, it's going to steer my way of thinking and behavior in terms of how do I tackle or approach certain situations or problems.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the thing is when you break it down into those little pieces, um, when you think about it, all of those things contribute to your identity, right?
Mm,
So when you say, I'm a homeowner, I'm a father, I'm a coach, I'm a all these different, they're essentially labels that you give yourself or other people bestow on you certain labels, and and so those. I think the big reason I find it so important to reflect and recognize this is to, in the same way that that I talk about, the beliefs that you have can really limit you or they can empower you,
mm,
and the labels that you give yourself they can limit yourself or they can really empower you. I think one of the most powerful things that you can say is I am, followed by whatever, right? These I am statements that we make about ourselves,
mm,
they are often speaking to an identity that we have created in our minds of who we are. And with that identity come, some really good things that we believe about ourselves, but also some limitations. Like,
mm,
I'm not good at math, or I'm, this whole thing about I'm an introvert and I'm an extrovert, right?
mm,
That's a label because it's a spectrum. It's not, I am categorically this, because that doesn't mean that in a small group of people that you can't be outgoing and outspoken, but maybe in a larger group, right? So what does that mean? What does that label mean that you've given yourself, right?
mm,
And what does that mean when you call yourself a father? Does that conjures a certain thing, and does it empower you? Does it mean my life's full and rich or whatever, or does it limit you? Oh, I can't do these things anymore. These are
mm,
things that are excluded now from my life because I am now this label or this role. The role, I think, is different because it talks about sort of behaviors and responsibilities. But I think when you talk about identity, when you become identified with a certain type of person, I think that's where it's important to recognize, okay, the way I define this identity, the way I've given this label to myself, are there things about that are limiting my life that are, and sometimes you want to exclude things like I don't need to go, out to a club until 4 a.m., or, and whereas some people will feel like they're missing out if they can't do that. I'm not one of
mm.
them, but anyway, you understand what I'm saying. It's this, this identity that we've created for ourselves. Is it empowering us or is it limiting us in some way?
Mm. Yeah. Um, and that's what when you were mentioning, I also thought about the things that we. I always come back to that as I feel like, but we're talking so much about false assumptions.
Mm,
That I'm not good at this, or as you said, I am something something something. But if you add, I am this sometimes, or I'm this. Are you always like that? Like obviously I'm a father. I'm always going to be a father, but my behaviors as a father, I don't display them at all times. That would drive me crazy, right? It would
mm.
drive people around me crazy if I was acting like a father to them all the time.
Yeah, when you're around other parents, the people show the pictures of their kids.
Yeah.
I used to show pictures of my dog before she passed away, but yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, don't want to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. No, so I think that's important and interesting to add that dimension or that question mark to challenge that a bit. So what are you more? I had a individual in a workshop yesterday who was the same thing. It's like I'm not a leader, and I challenge that. Well, says who? Like who says that you're not a leader? Well, I don't think that I'm so good at that. And it's this self doubt that we're putting on ourselves. And of course, we have wonderful capabilities that any leader would like to have, like you can display, right? So it depends on who's saying it and the light from where you're looking at it.
Absolutely, and I think this is where we get into the area of Dr. Carol Dweck's research, where she talks about mindset, right? So the
Yeah.
fixed mindset and the growth mindset, and obviously that fixed mindset that can be part of that whole identity of I'm not this, or I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this. Here are the things I'm good at. Here are the things I'm not good at. Instead, if we can convert that to, well, I don't know how to do that yet. I'm not a good leader yet. I'd like to learn how to be a better leader. Those are growth mindset statements. Whereas when your identity tends to feel a lot more fixed, right? And this is also where I think it can lead people into crisis when they become overly identified with a certain way of being, a certain lifestyle. They talk about the two of the biggest life crises, or I think the top three life crises are, a death of someone close to us, a divorce, and losing your job. I guess it depends on where you are in your career, but if it's a really, if you are a breadwinner for a family, or one of the key breadwinners, and you lose your job, that's a pretty big deal. But part of that being, especially if it's a career that when I think about professionals here in Germany, they'll have a certain title, they might have a company car, certainly a certain lifestyle that comes with it. And let's say then they lose that job and they can't find a new job, that there's a part of their identity that's missing there. And that is apart from the stress of, how am I going to pay the rent or whatever. The loss of identity is very, very big. And I can tell you that I felt that, I know leading up to the end of my, I've been married before and divorced now for a long time, so it's long behind me. But I know one of the things that, the relationship was already in bad shape, but I struggled against, I don't think anybody loves giving up on a marriage, and or any relationship for that matter. But there was certainly, upon reflecting, a question in my mind, who will I be outside this marriage, right? I didn't like the label of divorced. I just hated the idea of having that label, because I was going to be one of those exceptions that would never be in that position. And then who am I then? Who am I outside of this relationship? You get so invested and so identified with, I am the husband of this woman, right? In my case. So who am I if I'm not that, right? And so it becomes this crisis of identity. Any major shift in life and change, it can leave you with this sense of loss of identity. And I think this is one of the challenges when we limit our identity, or we become really over-identified with a job, a lifestyle, a relationship. There's no guarantee in life, and there you can lose that. And the same goes for having a standard of living. There are plenty of millionaires that have lost it all, gained it back maybe, but there are people who have had a certain life, lost it all, and had to restart. And the people who restart successfully are the people who can let go of that identity. And I think when you look at change, people who are looking to make change in their lives, whether it's personally or within organizations, the people that are really going to resist against change are these people who have a very rigid identity of who they are, what their role is, what they can and can't do. Those are the people who have really struggled with change. And that's why I think, recognizing this whole concept of identity is really important. And because we don't notice it maybe. At the time when I was going through my divorce, and I didn't notice, I didn't reflect on the fact that for me, there's an element of identity crisis here. I remember, because I don't own a car anymore, because I really found I was driving it. I owned a really nice car for a long time, and I think it was a bit of a sign of my success, and but I realized it didn't make any sense to own it, and I there was a part of me, and I pride myself. I've been on my personal development journey for a long time, and I was almost embarrassed to recognize that there was a part of me that was identified with that car, and going, "Who am I going to be when I give up this car?" And when I got rid of it, I just felt liberated. I just felt so much better, and I don't miss it. That was 2019, and I don't miss it, even through all of the COVID and being stuck at home. I don't miss it. Luckily, living in a city, there's car sharing if I ever need it. Really good infrastructure here in Hamburg, so the practical side of that was never the issue. But I won't mention the brand or anything. But it was the kind of this, and it's so ridiculous to think that 4 wheels and an engine, and the brand on the front of it could mean so much. And after all of these years of self-reflection, working on myself, it was kind of, I'd say I was a little embarrassed to recognize that there was a small part of me that was still worried about, how will this affect my day? And then afterwards, it was no problem, and that was a relief to recognize that. Good, I'm not. This over-attachment to things, and this over-identification with things. So anyway, that's my long story about that. But I've experienced it in my life. Is why I'm speaking from experience.
Yeah, and that's super interesting, and I think everybody's kind of had that experience, but maybe it's very easily gone by and you don't really notice it, right? Of course, when you lose something, you're forced to detach from something. It can be, as you mentioned before, it could be a great trauma. It's interesting when you mentioned those 3 big traumas that you might encounter. I see for a lot of people, as you mentioned, feeling liberated. I can imagine for a lot of people as well, that can be a great sense of liberation, right? In the example, take an example, if you're if you're losing a parent, of course that is usually seem like a trauma or something really, really sad. But for some people, that can be extremely liberating, depending on the relationship that they're having, and dependent on the situation of the parent by the last year. So it can be like a sigh of relief. Finally, now I can create my own identity, or I can do. I can move on with my own agenda or whatever it be.
Yeah, and
I'm just playing with assumptions here. But it's in any kind of situation, because it can seem like a trauma, but it can also be a great opportunity to do that restart that you're talking about. Yeah, I'm not saying it easy and that it's always the case, but in many cases, I think it can be like that.
Those big crises, these big changes in life, they often cause people to I don't know if reinvent yourself is the right word, but they certainly to reflect on who am I now? Who am I going forward, right? And I think especially if you had someone who passed away and there was a lot of suffering involved, and it was it can be a real burden on the caretaker of that person, not intentionally from the person who's dying. Obviously, that's obviously no fault of theirs, but I think as much as, and I don't think a lot of people would want to admit this, but as much as there's loss there, and you hate to see that person go, but you're also relieved that they're no longer suffering, and then comes the recognition that, wow, that's a big burden off my shoulders now. And I think it's okay to think and feel that, because I've luckily never had to do it myself, but I've watched people who've had to take care of a loved one. My aunt, took care of for 6 years my uncle, going through remission and so on. He struggled with cancer, and after 6 years he passed away. But also she took care of my grandfather with dementia, and that's really not a treat. And never complained, never always was a trooper. But I think as much as, she'd never talk about it that way. I'm sure there was a sense of, as much as there's pain in the loss of the people we love, but certainly yeah, you're right. It can be a real unburdening. So I think we've gotten a little off track of the identity thing, but I know what you mean. The separation from, exactly that. I'm a caretaker of this person. You kind of get into this role, and it becomes your identity. You identify with it, and then there's this sense of, well, am I still needed? You've got your sense of purpose within this thing that you do, and for those people, it can definitely be a challenge in terms of identity and who are you now. So even things that. And I don't know how we got on the topic of death. It's such a dark topic. But when in 2020, in the middle of COVID, my dog of almost 14 years passed away, and I couldn't believe how much. Well, it hit me a lot harder than I thought, and that I had an identity as a dog owner, right? And then all of a sudden you don't have a dog, so I started fostering dogs, and I still get to have that identity, and I there's a well, because I have I love animals, but I think having that relationship between pet and caregiver and so on. I don't know. It's just it's become part of my identity over all these years of being a dog owner. And now my girlfriend has a dog, so now with travel and stuff, it's been difficult to even take a foster dog. But so I can still hang on to a bit of that, right? A bit of that identity. So I mean, these are just some personal examples. But if you take it further to, let's say, you've been a certain job all your life. I talked earlier about pro athletes. You have an injury, and then you can no longer play the sport that you love, and maybe you've played professionally. Even if you made plenty of money to retire, but then there's that question: who am I? Yeah. And can you be happy? Finding a new identity, and so. That's obviously a very unique case, but let's say you due to an injury you can't do the job you love to do, right? Or we find at some point at a certain age, the company doesn't want, there's young dynamic people who are, and I even find myself getting to an age now where when 20 years ago it was easier to travel. It didn't feel as hard on my body. I still love to travel. That's not as much of an issue, but I think there are people who get to a certain age who don't love to travel anymore and so if you're in a job that requires that, right? So I think there are all these things where either by choice or by circumstance, you can no longer really do the job that or maybe you just don't love the job you do anymore. But you don't know what else to do, and you're so identified with it. And these are the things that stop us from changing, because I don't know who I'd be without this. I've heard people say that. I don't know who I would be without this relationship or this situation or this job, right?
I think I've referred maybe a few times to the work of Robert Keegan, Immunity to Change. Yeah. And that's basically what we're saying there, that the immunity to change is talking more about false assumption and our values that are, which we identify, but they are telling us, who we are, and therefore I must behave in this way. But so there's a great value of challenging that identity or that false assumption. Think about, well, what happens if I don't do this? What's at risk if I don't have this car, or if I'm not seen as successful, or if I'm not seen as a husband, or whatever it is. Like, what's at risk, and taking that what's at risk question many steps. And looking at what's actually gonna happen, and why is it so difficult for me to detach myself from that identity? It's kind of hard work, but it's essentially those kind of questions that we need to de-discover or yeah, decover to get somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the thing, to let go of that fear of the unknown, right? You
Mm.
can't know who you will be after you have a sudden break from, a certain life that you lived, right? Or a separation from the things that you identify with.
Mm.
So it's natural to have a certain amount of fear, but as long as you don't let that get in the way of the change that you need and actually on some level want in your life.
Mm.
So just because you can't imagine being someone else is no reason to not explore it, right?
Yeah.
Especially if the life that you're living now is not is not making you happy, is not creating success for you, is not creating value for others. I think those are all good reasons to reevaluate. Look at I think I came to I had a passion for coaching for a long time that I didn't pursue because I made good money in the corporate world, and obviously there are the usual fears. Will I be as successful working as a coach and doing these things,
Mm.
and but also I had created this identity for myself, and so do I know how this new identity is going to feel? And you want to be successful in the role that you're playing, and so will
Mm.
I reach the same success in this new version of myself? And so
Mm.
and I'm sure there'll be people who ask, well, will people like me in this, this identity, this version of myself? And
Yeah.
those are all typical questions that get asked.
Yeah.
So,
I
but
think I think it's interesting also to look at the perspectives there of, who are you, what's the benchmark? What are you comparing against? I
mm,
mean, like, okay, so you want to be a coach. What does success look like to you? Is it to have, a few coaching hours a week, or is it to become like Tony Robbins or something with, and or yeah, I want to be successful. Well, how do you measure your success? Well, through financial earnings. Well, okay, so do you compare yourself to Elon Musk, or your neighbor, or it's very different kind of standards, very various kind of standards. So what's relevant for you, and what because it's very easy for us to identify with something that has nothing to do with our own interests. It's just something that we would like to be perceived by like this by our environment. But is it that your environment that is judging that, or is it you yourself? And so,
exactly.
so setting your own kind of standards for the identity that you feel good about. I mean, that's a topic in its own,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Well, I think that you're kind of pointing towards the values as well, because for me, it was I didn't make the change. If I wanted to have the title and the and the all the perks and the salary, I would have stayed focused on what I was doing before.
Mm.
I've been fortunate that to still do well in even though making this change. But that was never the motivator for me. It was always the journey that I've taken through life and all the ways that I've overcome the inner challenges, right? And then
Mm.
also then finding ways to apply that to individuals and organizations. I think that's really, as I've said a few times, for me, it's been about how do I add value for a number of years. That's been the primary driver.
Mm.
And for me, in my philosophy, I think when you do that, the finances will come anyway. I agree
Mm.
with you. I think clarifying goals is important, but for me, it's the value thing. And the reason I bring this up is because I think the identity we've created for ourselves sometimes can be in conflict with our values. And then if
Exactly.
that's the
Yeah.
case,
Mm.
it's no wonder we're unhappy. And it's
Yeah.
no,
Mm.
it's no wonder we're miserable if we're doing a job that requires us to be a certain way, make certain decisions, and that's totally contrary to the values that we that are important to us. And so we put our values, in second or third place to those other priorities, because we're being someone we think we have to be. And a lot of times, you'll get this with leaders too. Especially people who are in a new management role, and they feel that they have to make certain changes to their personality and who they are with other people. And I see a lot of things go wrong that way. They make these assumptions about and these are identity issues. These are issues of, well, I have to create this identity of who I am, and certain attributes and actions go along with that. And then, very quickly that can spiral out of, it can cause issues within the team, but also within that person, they're departing from some of their values because they're being who they think they should be, right? So that I think that causes a lot of problems in organizations, within teams, but most often within individuals themselves. And then they lose sight of it, and then years go by, and they come to a coach, and then they wonder why they're not happy. And we get back down to recognizing these conflicts, and you can stop them before they get out of control.
Yeah, and we're always I guess there's a saying that says you're always a victim of the environment or the context that you're in, right? I don't know if that's a saying or not, but we say something like that in Swedish at least. But what I mean is that it's so common, it's so easy for us, for all individuals, including myself, that we come into situations where our surroundings have an effect on us, which we change ourselves to fit into that kind of environment. So we shift our identity a little bit, and that can go unnoticed for a really long time. And eventually you might find yourself be very far from your authentic self, and that will create a really big problem, right? And I also always think it's interesting when you look at really like high achieving kind of executive teams. They get there for a reason, but they nurture each other's strengths, and they become very alike in the way that they think. And it's very difficult to stay true to your own kind of thinking and your own way. And I think that happens to us all the time when we come into different contexts, right?
I agree. I think the higher you go in an organization, the more responsibility and the more pressure that's on you, the more difficult it can be for some. Not all. I think the really good leaders are great at remaining authentic. But it can be really difficult to remain authentic and true to your values with the pressure that comes with those high-level leadership jobs, right? So I think it's an important thing to reflect on and keep in check, right? As you're, especially if you're transitioning, if you're going through a major change, and making sure that these new aspects of your life and the new identity you're creating for yourself is congruent with your values, is in line with the things that you value, and then you'll be on the right track. And I think the best leaders really have, these people who have vision, they have they have a clear philosophy, and they are really in touch with, these are my values, and this is the way I live my life, and that's not going to change. And I think those are great examples. It's not easy. It's not easy in high pressure environments, or even when people put a lot of pressure on themselves. It can be within a family, right? This is the person I've got to be if I'm going to be a mother, a father, a leader of a household, or whatever. Or within a community, peer pressure. Peer pressure can be huge, right? Here's the person I want others to see, and it's not really who I am, but it's who I think they want, that I have to be. It's the role that I have to play. And these are all really important things to recognize when we're talking about identity. I want to shift things a little bit, because I know we could talk about this one part of it for ages, and I don't want us to be a 2-hour podcast today. I know we've had some comments about, keep it under an hour. I think the other thing that I wanted to explore a little bit with you is, I work systemically. That's my coaching background is a systemic coaching background, and so I've you learn about Bert Hellinger and his work with, obviously he worked with families, so he had his family constellation, where you look at the system, the system of your immediate family or your social group, and even generations back. So, but systemically speaking, we have sort of a system, whether it's in the workplace, you can look at it systemically, all the moving parts and people around you, or within a family unit, but you also within yourself. You can see yourself from different levels. So, you might have heard people talk about the inner critic or inner child, and these are all systemically different elements that we develop through our lifetime, in different ways, and they're kind of part of us. So you have this inner system, and I think, without going into too much detail about that, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't even want to. Bert Hellinger was a psychologist, so that's why I don't want to go too much into the theoretical. But I think it's good to look at yourself from multiple perspectives, because when you're asking that question, who am I, right? So I find a good exercise to do is, this exercise of what do you tell someone when you're introducing yourself? And it'll be your age, your marital status, maybe what you studied, your career, your job title, or whatever. You talked about homeowner, and then I ask people to do the mental exercise. Okay, what if all of those things are erased? What if you have memory loss, or what if you have somehow magically those things disappear? Who are you then? What's left then? And you start to go deeper and deeper. And I think when you look at your identity on all those different levels, you can talk about the inner child, or you can talk about the things going on internally. And when you're looking at it from those different levels, I also look at things from physical, mental, and spiritual. And the spiritual doesn't need to be this esoteric thing, because in Germany they talk about the Geistig is the spiritual, it's the ghost, but they refer to it more in the emotional sense, right? So you've got your, when they. It's almost like this when you have something like depression or something. It's almost like an illness of the spirit, right? Is the reference. So when you look at it on those levels, we have biological needs, we have physical needs, we have mental needs. We want to be mentally challenged or stimulated, and so on. The mind wants to be occupied with things, and then you have the emotional side, right? So you can look at it on those three systems, or you can. And the reason I point these things out is because when you ask yourself this question of who am I, and you start to dig into the different levels and layers of who you are, it's not just simply, the superficial stuff like your name, your gender, your age, all those things. Those are all on the surface level. But when you dig a little bit deeper, then and you define yourself from multiple layers, then you can start to, when you're asking yourself or making questions, and you're considering your values, and you're trying to make choices, you can ask yourself, well, I really want this. Well, who wants that? Who wants that? Is that the child in me who's still trying to get approval from a parent? And okay, we're getting into therapy stuff, because as a coach, I don't work with people in the past, but just that recognition that if you have an issue there and you have this strong desire, and you work on that with a therapist and or some counseling, then you can, maybe you will no longer want that, right? So, but the connection I'm trying to make is we create this when you have your identity, and you can break it down into different elements systemically, and then you can start to recognize, you start to have better self-awareness of what's driving certain behaviors, what is causing certain desires and needs. Why do you communicate? And this is why when we talk to organizations about communication, we'll look at things like the DISC model, right? From that stems from Marston's original research, and look at what's your communication style, or what needs do you have, what expectations do you have? Like that's the whole reason we do this kind of stuff. It's just different ways of looking at yourself. And just because you're like speaking from the disc model, you're dominant or your stabilizer or whatever, that's a label you give yourself, but it's not meant to limit you. It's meant to help you recognize what your needs are and how you best communicate and all of that stuff. And so that's why breaking your identity down into different levels and looking at it from different perspectives is very helpful for understanding what your needs are and why you want certain things, and helping you sort of recognize where your patterns of behavior are coming from. The things, why do I always do that? Why does that always trigger me in that situation? Well, it has to do with when you look at, if you're looking at yourself just from, those superficial areas of your identity, you're not going to find the answer there. But if you dig down and look at yourself on different levels, and I think I talked before about the research that was done. It came out of Robert Sapolsky's book, Behave. He talked about the research about the judges who have different, make different judgments. They're parole judges, and they make different judges depending on if it's before lunch or after lunch, depending on how hungry they are, how tired they are, and so on. So that's recognizing, well, that's me, the physical me, right? That's affecting me, and just recognizing mental patterns, and that's why I think breaking down the identity to multiple levels, and recognizing that you're not just all the superficial labels that you've given yourself. You're something far deeper, and when you can break it down and look at it a little bit more closely, you can understand yourself and your needs, your wants, and your decisions, and your behavior is so much better. And that's when you allow yourself to change as well. So I just wanted to put that whole systemic piece out there, and just for people's awareness and hopefully encouragement to look deeper into sort of knowing yourself on multiple levels, not just being satisfied with the sort of labels that you've given yourself to create an identity.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. I'm really intrigued by this idea that any element or any particle there's always something smaller, right? So if we go outwards and stuff are bigger, I think that's kind of comprehensible. It's not comprehensible, but it kind of makes sense. But for me, at least, to think that there are always particles that can get smaller and smaller and smaller. And what you're saying is it becomes so interesting to go, as what we started talking about, to go beyond that identity and look at the smaller particles, but then really how far can we go? I mean, there's no end to it, right? But at least challenge ourselves to look a little bit further. So, what is making it uncomfortable for me to do this? From as you say, from the physical part of the mental model that I'm using, my thinking pattern or whatever. Well, where's that coming from? And then you go further and further and further. There might not be an end to it, and but it's I think, for at least for me, it's really energizing to think that we can go so much further to understand on a very small level how the whole complex of ourselves is pulling together and creating this identity, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff to analyze. And maybe I'm starting to sound like as a therapist or something that I'm not. No. But it's really interesting to dig deeper.
Yeah, you don't have to be a therapist or psychologist to have an interest in how these things work within us and within others. I think having a curiosity is a good thing, and I'm not putting any theories out there, but I even, the methods that stem from Hellinger's work, I actually, these constellations, and I actually will work with people on a coaching level. There's different tools that you can use, and just being able to visualize the different pieces is really helpful for people. And this is the reason I bring this up. So breaking down elements of your personality, and I've worked with people, and I've even observed this done where, you'll have people who, go through this process of some self-defeating behavior or something. And it can be, you can call them parts of your personality, or you can call them states or whatever, but it really helped to give names, labels to these oh, that's my inner rebel. That's my, that's my inner saboteur or whatever. And then just recognizing that that's at work within you. And that contributes to the whole of who you are, your whole identity. That's only part of you. And if we become, for me, I have a strong inner critic, but if I become over-identified with just that inner narrative that comes from the inner critic, I'd be paralyzed, right? I wouldn't. And so when we become over-identified with certain things, people who are very focused on, you can be very focused on your health, or you can be very focused on, well, I got to look a certain way. And then the thing is, what's your obsession with your body about? Is it about top health, or is it trying to be this identity for other people? There are very different motivations there. And so I think those are just, and that's just one superficial example, but, why are you a workaholic? And some people even revel in that they won't admit it, but I'm a workaholic, they shrug it off, but really they love that identity, that they're so hardworking. And what is it? Is it because, you grew up being told you were lazy or you were never good enough or whatever? I don't want to psychoanalyze it, but it's good to recognize that, you've given yourself this identity of, I'm a really hard worker. But where's the balance in your life? Are you a good, if you're a really hard worker, if you're a workaholic and you're also a father, are you a good father if you're a workaholic, right? A recent workshop, we were talking about leadership, and one person said, their role model's Elon Musk. And I think pretty highly of Elon Musk and his vision and everything. But I said, are you sure that's a good role model for you? Because he believes you got to work like hell. You got to work 16, 18-hour days to be successful. He's a guy that sleeps on the floor of his production facilities sometimes. And, is that what you aspire to be and we need some of those people. And it's not a judgment either way. But you got to be careful about what you're and what you're giving up to live that certain identity and
what you identify with. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You have to be careful with that. Yeah, because that will drive your behaviors, and if you do that unconsciously, it will drive behaviors that you don't want to have.
Yeah. This is what it means to be Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and also think about, like, if you're, for example, if you're a workaholic, what's driving that? But also, what is it not driving? So if you're a workaholic, what are you doing? But then in that case, what's the downside of that? So I mean, for a common scenario is like, well, I'm a control freak, so I need to be on top of things. So I'm not very likely to delegate and develop my other staff or employees or something. So in the identity then of being a leader, what are the pros and cons of that, etc. So that, I mean, to balancing that out and look at it from different perspectives. I'm identifying with this behavior. What is that reflecting or not reflecting in that case?
Absolutely. And I think this is the problem where we become over-identified with one thing. There's this, this is why it's important to look at identity as what are all the different components, because if you're over-identified with one aspect of your personality or your life, there are going to be costs. And so, but it's not just the work or the leadership one. I mean, if there are people who have this identity of I'm very fashionable, I'm very and they work to finance their wardrobe, and there are going to be costs to that, right? But they have this identity. This is who I am. This is who I've got to be, and then asking yourself, well, are those really my values, or am I trying to be someone that other people approve of? Am I trying to be someone that gets a lot of attention? It's just like people who are in performing arts, people who are aspiring to be. I look at it's so funny because the It used to be kids aspire to be sports stars or music stars or whatever. Now they want to be YouTube influencers or something. It's influencers like us. We're big YouTube stars. No, obviously not. But it's interesting. What is driving that? What sense of identity are you trying to create? Because any time where you're putting a persona out there, it's one side. It's never. It's difficult to be really authentic. In the same way, it's difficult in high pressure jobs as a leader, as someone who wants to be. I always wondered what it's like for, like say, an actor who plays all these different roles in movies, especially the ones who are very successful at doing it. Do they even know who their authentic self is, because they spend so much time in character? I mean, I'm not saying it's not, they don't or they can't. I'm curious, because I think having had times in my life where I became a certain person because of the work that I did, and because work was all encompassing in my life, it changed who I was for a time. And I also remember backpacking through Asia for 6 months, where there too, there was a different version of myself, the different habits, but I also saw myself in a different way, and I had this different identity. And for a while, it was hard for me to go back to seeing myself in an office job or something like that. So, I think that it's a complex topic, but there's so many moving parts. But that's why it's important, I think, for people to be aware of. If you have a really strong identification with one part of your life or one part of your personality, something is probably going to be getting sacrificed, and it'll come back to haunt you at some point.
And just imagine. What I want to say is that it's really important to, I think, think about the different identities that you have. And if you're saying, I mean, if we play around with that example that you put with a famous athlete, if you are only identified as a famous athlete, what's going to happen when you're not famous or not successful? And again, if you're identified as a fashion icon, I imagine the pressure every time you go through your wardrobe, or every time you step outside. What are we going to wear today? For me, that would be absolutely dreadful.
Me too. I hate shopping. No, absolutely.
But just so, I mean, we're talking about identity, but I just, we don't have one identity, or maybe we have, but there's a lot of different aspects to it. And
it's nuanced.
We might be seen as one identity in the view of a certain amount of group, but that's so far from the true self and from the whole perception of others that we get. Right?
And I think that's the important point that I'm glad you brought it up, because that's an emphasis of what I wanted to talk about today. Your identity is a collective of it's this aggregate of these different parts of your personality, and so the important thing is, the identity that you have created for yourself. So your own perception of who you are, right? This identity that you have created, and it has multiple components, obviously. Is it holding you back, or is it good for you, right? Or are you over-identified? Are you too attached to certain parts of this identity, and that's making you sacrifice in other areas? Or is it keeping you from change? And I think the other part that we probably haven't gone into in too much detail is this: what limits are you creating by putting yourself in a category, by putting a label on yourself, by saying, this is the kind of person I am, this is the kind of person I'm not. I'm not a person who eats those kind of foods, right? Maybe it would be healthy to eat those kind of foods, or maybe you're missing out on some variety, and I think this is. I think it limits our ability to have experiences, and it certainly limits our ability to change. And as a coach, I'm really focused on helping people achieve their highest potential. And so sometimes we're so identified with being a certain way that we can't tap into our potential. We can't break free of that sort of, at least the part of our identity that we're so married to, and we can't let go of, is keeping us from the change or keeping us from that potential that we would otherwise have.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's we could go. I mean, this is going in different directions, but it's interesting how it's also sort of combining so many things that we've been talking about. I mean, what's our values, our purpose, the roles that we're taking, the difficulties and the opportunities with change, etc. So it's really an overwhelming topic.
It's all interconnected, and I one of my mottos is always awareness allows change, and I think this is these are the reasons I like to have these discussions. I think it raises my awareness on things, or reminds me of things that I already knew. But I think for people listening, it's really about raising their level of awareness and just giving people something to think about when they say, when they say, "This is who I am." Go a little deeper, right? Maybe not in explaining to other people, but when you're reflecting yourself on who am I. If you're 40 and you think I know who I am, look, I've lived all of my life, and it's there may be something you're overlooking, and if you haven't looked within for a while, then maybe you don't know who you don't know the answer to that who am I question as well as you might think.
Yeah, and also this, to relate it to a little bit as we did, to relate it to authenticity, that I think maybe me, if I'm thinking about myself, I've been in positions before when I was in one role or one identity, I was very uncomfortable revealing that in other contexts, and that was making me feeling very inauthentic in that sense. But the better you can incorporate these different identities as a whole that you were talking about, I think the easier it is to balance that authenticity, so you can feel genuine in every type of situation, and giving you a little bit more of a alignment or a consistency in your life and in your behaviors.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great value to look at. I mean, that from the systemic point of view, that's the other end, where you're really looking at the holistic part and combining it all together. And I think that it's a great value in that as well.
Absolutely, and I think we haven't touched a whole lot on the organizational or the team aspect of it, but whether it's an individual and and creating an identity that really brings out the most in your potential, but also within organizations and teams. I think this is why it's so important to have clearly stated values in companies and organizations. It's so important to have this, as Simon Sinek talks about, your why, and understanding why we do what we do, right? It's not just knowing what we do and how we do it. It's knowing why we do what we do, and those are the kind of things that really help to reinforce an identity within a team, within when you're really clear about the culture you want in terms of, these are the behaviors we want, and these are the behaviors that we don't want. These are the ways we want to treat each other. And that is all part of creating your team identity, your group identity. And I think you hear a lot about group identity these days. And again, it's unfortunately very politicized. It's talking about very superficial things instead of talking about values. And so I think you can, whether it's within a society, within an organization, or within individuals, really getting clear on what your own values are, and making sure that you're not just focusing on one element or focusing on what the world wants from you or what other people want from you, and putting that out there. It's really finding your authentic self. And as a neuroscientist will tell you, there's no spot in the brain that is the authentic self. You won't find it anywhere. It's something for you to define yourself, and that you do that by getting clear on your beliefs, your philosophy, knowing your values, and looking at your identity from multiple levels, right? Breaking it down to the different layers, understanding your needs and wants, and making sure that you're not over identified with one thing, especially not external things. The more attachment this is something Buddhism teaches, but this attachment to these things is just an identification, right? Like people get really unhappy when they lose things because they're so identified with that. That's part of who I am. Well, it's not part of who you are, and you can be happy without it, right? I think that's just such an important message. So, anyway, what do you think? Should we leave it there? Do you have something else to say? Obviously, you have lots more to say, but
I think there could be a lot more to say, but I think this is a good point to sort of tie up this conversation for the day.
Yeah,
we have other stuff to do as well coming up.
Yeah, actually, I think this one's gone longer, but I mean that's what happens when you tackle a huge topic like this one. But anyway, for those people listening, thanks for tuning in. I hope this has been stimulating, and I think I would encourage people to have the courage to, sometimes it's scary to look within, but have the courage to kind of look at, who am I? And not just the stuff, the superficial stuff like your age, your name, your heritage or whatever. Those are fine. Those are important, but like really getting deeper and looking at things like values and the things that desires you have that are maybe not work related or whatever. So there's lots of ways to look at yourself, and I hope today's discussion has helped people, get some motivation to look within. Yeah.
It was really interesting. Thanks for bringing such a good topic.
So, well, thanks for engaging me because, these are the things that swirl through my head, and this is a great opportunity to be able to vocalize, and I hope that adds value for others. So for the next one, for people who don't listen to us all the time, this is we do these every 2 weeks, and the next one we will be doing, I'll be live and in person in Sweden. Tobi and I will be. I don't know if we'll be live streaming, but we'll certainly be recording the next one together. So it'll be your topic next. I look forward to seeing what you come up with. And
I forgot. I thought we agreed on a topic, but I have to look at my notes. We talked about something.
Yeah, maybe we did. Maybe we did. Okay, well, great. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much. I hope you're well. I hope this has been stimulating, and really appreciate you tuning in and listening to us. And until next time, be well. We'll talk to you again soon.
Take care.
Cheers.